The closing ceremonies of the Olympic Games don't quite get the same love as the opening ceremonies, and I get that, I really do. But there's still lots of good stuff in the closing ceremonies, so today, let's explore some of the more interesting and important elements of it. Let's go. It's a chill vibe. Typically, the closing ceremonies are a lot more loose and celebratory than the opening ceremonies and have much more of like a party atmosphere. It gives this lighter feeling to end the Olympics, and that makes sense. If you think about it, as an athlete and as a host city, you are on the edge for the opening ceremonies. The enormity of the whole thing is insane, the entire world is watching, and you still have a competition ahead of you. So you can understand why it's hard for everyone to relax at those opening ceremonies. But at the closing ceremonies, all the pressure is off, things are wrapping up, and whether you won or lost, you are generally in the mood to celebrate what you've achieved and what you've experienced. This may be a hot take, but a big part of me prefers the closing ceremonies for exactly this reason, though feel free to disagree with me in the comments below. Also, did you know that the closing ceremonies are mandated to occur on a Sunday evening? I didn't know that. How's that for a fun fact? The Parade of Athletes. This is one of the cool and unique differences between the opening and closing ceremonies, in my opinion. Unlike the opening ceremony, athletes are mixed in the stadium together. And this is supposed to symbolize global unity and camaraderie, and this is known as the Parade of Athletes. This tradition actually began at the 1956 Melbourne Olympics, and if you can believe it, it was suggested by an Australian schoolboy at the time named John Ian Wing, who thought it would be a good way to bring the people of the world together as one nation. He wrote a letter to the International Olympic Committee, anonymously at first, suggesting the idea, and it was obviously well received. It proved popular, and it's been a mainstay of the closing ceremonies ever since. And fittingly, they ended up giving him a bronze medal in recognition of his contribution to the traditions and history of the Olympics. And that's just lovely, if you ask me. Handing over to the next host. The closing ceremony features a segment where the current host city officially hands over the Olympic flag to the next host city. So using the Summer Olympics as an example, in the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, they handed it over to Paris, and in 2024, Paris hands it over to Los Angeles for the 2028 Games, and that's kind of fun. It's a nice way to connect the events together, especially since they're 4 full years apart. And it's also a way for the International Olympic Committee to at least put the next Olympics onto the radar of the average viewer, even though they're probably not going to think about it again for like 3 years, 11 months, and 2 weeks. Basically, the way it works is that the current mayor of the current host city hands the Olympic flag to the president of the IOC, who in turn hands the flag to the current mayor of the next host city. The receiving mayor then waves the flag 8 times. That's pretty specific, huh? Extinguishing the Olympic flame. At the opening ceremonies, the lighting of the Olympic flame is one of the most famous and marquee moments, and it's been done very creatively in the past, so there's some flair and some drama to it. But just as important from the perspective of traditions is the extinguishing of the flame at the closing ceremony. It obviously marks the end of the current games, but just as importantly, it marks the start of the new cycle where attention turns to the next host city. This is pretty much the last thing that officially happens during the Olympic Games, though I have it on good authority that there's an absolutely rip-roaring off-the-charts after-party that would make a US college fraternity look like a convent. But obviously, I've never been invited, so I can't confirm. Thanking the volunteers. So this probably goes without saying, but the number of human beings required to put on an Olympic Games is insane. And while there are salaried folks working the games, they usually still have to rely on thousands upon thousands of volunteers to pull it off. And rightfully, they recognize these volunteers at the closing ceremony. The tradition is that the newly elected members of the International Olympic Committee's Athletes Commission present a bouquet of flowers to a representative of the volunteers as a thank you to them for their work during the games. Aw, that's so sweet. Now, I'm not saying a single bouquet of flowers isn't a lovely gesture. I mean, it's better than nothing. But given this is a multi-billion-dollar organization that prints money and does it on the back of free labor, and not just the volunteers, remember, they don't pay the athletes, maybe something more than flowers would be warranted, like a gift card or something. Come on, guys. Cultural performances. Host nations often showcase their culture through elaborate performances, music, and dances. This happens at both the opening as well as the closing ceremonies, and it's honestly one of the funnest and most talked about parts of the ceremonies. Because these cultural performances are highly individualized and reflect the host country, you can get some wildly different and hugely unique performances, which makes them a must-watch. But importantly, at the closing ceremonies, it's not just about the current host city. The next host city also gets to introduce itself with a cultural presentation of their own, providing a brief introduction of what is to come at the next Olympics. So for the Paris 2024 Olympics, not only will we get a cultural presentation for Paris, but also Los Angeles as the host of the 2028 Olympics. I'm assuming LA's cultural presentation will just be movie stars stuck in traffic. That makes sense to me. The last medal ceremony. Most medal ceremonies take place right at the venue where the event occurs, and it usually happens relatively quickly after the end of the event. But that's not the case in the Summer Olympics, for example, with the marathon. Since 2000, the men's marathon medal ceremony usually takes place during the closing ceremony itself, highlighting this prestigious event that has substantial ties to the origins of the Olympic Games themselves. In 2020 in Tokyo, the women's marathon also had their medals awarded during the closing ceremonies, which I think makes pretty good sense. And for what it's worth, because who doesn't love a little symmetry, the Winter Olympics picked up on this tradition too. Starting in 2006, the men's 50-kilometer cross-country skiing event had the medal ceremony at the closing ceremony. And in 2014, they added the women's 30-kilometer event too. More anthems and flags. So if you're not already locked in on Olympic flags and national anthems by the time the closing ceremonies roll around, then you're going to get an extra dose to cap things off. You get to hear the Greek national anthem performed, it's called Hymn of Liberty, as well as see the flag of Greece raised. This has been done at every single Olympic Games since the current rules were adopted as a testament to the Greek origins of the Games. You'll also get some flags of the current host nation as well as the next host country, as you'd probably expect. Finally, you'll also get to hear the Olympic anthem, which is technically called the Olympic hymn. It's a real foot stomper, and it was written by opera composer Spiridon Samaras with lyrics by Greek poet Kostas Palamos. It was made the official anthem of the Olympics in 1958. Address by the IOC President. We all hate speeches, come on, we all do, but they do serve a purpose, and the closing ceremonies will certainly feature a few of them. The president of the organizing committee usually gives a speech, and this is followed by a speech by the current president of the International Olympic Committee. The president of the IOC officially declares the games closed and invites the youth of the world to the next celebration. And I'm not guessing that's what the IOC president will say. There's actually very specific language that is always used during the speech in which they specifically ask the youth of the world to come celebrate at the next Olympics. Sounds kind of desperate to me, if I'm being honest. A fireworks display. Oh yeah, you know there are going to be fireworks that night, mainly in the Olympic Village, if you know what I mean. No, but seriously, a grand fireworks display often accompanies the end of the ceremony, providing a stunning visual spectacle and one heck of a send-off to the games. And there's usually more fun in the stadium after the official stuff concludes. Usually there's a concert where musicians from the host country perform, and it just turns into a fun party. Like for example, at the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, you could have stuck around to see Nickelback perform. How fun! And that's the video for today. Appreciate you checking it out. Hopefully you now know a little bit more about the closing ceremonies. Aren't they interesting? Let me know what you love about the closing ceremonies in the comments below. Otherwise, until next time, you can consider this video closed, and I invite the youth of the world to watch the next one. See, I told you it sounded desperate.